Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:09 p.m. in a really dark and miserable Central European city of Budapest. These days there's no sun. That's a given. There's no light. That's a given. And it's cold and it's wet. That's also a given. And you suddenly realize that this is only November the 19th. There's, a whole month to look forward to when everything actually gets even worse and even darker and even more miserable. You have to switch the light on the moment you're up, and you have to keep the light on all day. That's how it is. However, on a more cheerful note, on a more cheerful note, um, and it is we should welcome our the guests at the live stream, and it's we can very much think in terms of thank all of our friends on the live stream, and want to obviously this is a great deal that's going on, and one thing that is the big event of the day is, of course, the I was just want to look something up before I forget, and here looking at the Donald Trump's Donald Trump's Donald Trump's page on Truth Social, and so, yeah, I am, because I just looked at Steve Brown's comment. He says, to Trump's credit, Trump has denounced the Biden decision on ATACMS publicly today. Steve, could you post a link to that? Because I looked on Trump's Truth Social page, and I didn't see his denunciation. So maybe he said it on Twitter, or he said it to somebody else. But I saw Don Jr.'s denunciation. That came on Sunday, but I haven't seen Trump denouncing Biden's decision. So, Steve, if you can link to where you saw this, that would be great. Um, um, uh, so the so we have the decision of Biden on the ATACMS, and and obviously we had Ukraine's attack today, attack on the Bryansk region, and I mean, obviously, and of course, you had the decree signed by Putin on which updating the Russia's nuclear doctrine. It's very much along the lines that we talked about yesterday, in which Russia envisages the use of nuclear weapons in the event of an attack by a non-nuclear power, but which is aligned with, encouraged by, armed by, trained by nuclear powers, and in particular, if the nuclear powers are themselves doing the targeting and providing the satellite information to launch the attack. So that was we've already known about this. This is this was, but he nonetheless signed it as a decree. Now, so first of all, on the Ukraine's use of the ATACMS, today's launch. So it was on in the Bryansk region, and the target hit was an arms depot. Now, there's something very interesting about that, because the rationale, and we examined that closely yesterday. The rationale for this attack, or this change in policy on the part of the Biden administration, was that the North Korea has joined the fray. Russia has invited in North Korea, and now North Koreans are supposedly going to be engaged in the Russian offensive to drive the Ukrainian beachhead out of Kursk. Now, this was obviously a very, very bizarre rationale, because even if the North Koreans are going to be involved in the fighting, for which there's no evidence at all that North Koreans will be involved in the fighting, and that's the reason for the North Korean presence in Russia. But that even if the North Koreans were to be involved in the fighting, then that's still on Russian territory. It's still inside Russia, and they're helping Russia to liberate its territory. That would hardly warrant the United States changing its policy, which it had outlined before, that, oh, well, we cannot possibly escalate. This is very, very dangerous stuff. We can't escalate. And now suddenly you're escalating, but you're escalating over fighting on Russian territory. How can that possibly justify escalation? It makes no sense. I remember when Biden said, I think sometime, was it in September 2022, he solemnly said, we are closer now than we have ever been to nuclear annihilation. We're closer now than we have ever been since the Cuban Missile Crisis to a nuclear conflagration. Of course, it was a typically idiotic Biden pronouncement, because, I mean, if you're really worried about nuclear conflagration, then maybe you should de-escalate. Maybe you should take whatever steps you can to make sure that we're not in the worst possible situation than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. But that's why it was one of the typically idiotic Biden pronouncement. Well, I should also say it's very interesting that I was watching some of the mainstream news today, particularly CNN, and their coverage of Ukraine, and they're all very, very excited about Biden's change of policy. And I had this guy, Ivor Dalda, I think that's how you pronounce it, Ivor Dalda. He's a kind of ubiquitous foreign policy expert. He's head of the Chicago Council on Foreign Affairs. And he was a former US ambassador to NATO. And he is, of course, very, very excited about this. And it's interesting how it's now the mainstream media, mainstream policy analysts who are the most reckless in basically urging World War III. So it basically used to be the case, let's say in the 1960s and 70s, that somehow the people who are in the United States who are going to trigger World War III were these right-wing nutcases, these right-wing absolutely dunderheads, these with their primitive anti-communism and cowboy attitudes. They are going to bring about World War III, and it's the cool heads, the sort of the sober, responsible, types in the mainstream media, the serious people who are saying, no, we got to cool things down, we got to work, have détente, we need to act responsibly towards the Soviet Union. And so now you get these Ivo Dalda types, like, who come on absolutely gung ho with sending whatever missiles America has, assuring us that Putin is bluffing, and bemoaning how the Republican Party is no longer the party of Ronald Reagan, and no longer the party of John McCain, no longer the party even of Mitch McConnell. So this is this Ivo Dalda, president of the Chicago Council of Foreign Affairs, U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he's saying, "Oh no, we can just do it." That Putin is bluffing, and then he said, well, Putin has to realize that if he tries to use nuclear weapons, we've got a hell of a lot more nuclear weapons than he has. And of course, these adulatory interviewers don't ask, what you're really saying here is you're cheerfully envisaging a nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine. Now, when did that happen? When was it decided that Ukraine was of such a vital interest of the United States that it was worth the sacrifice of millions of lives, not to mention the sacrifice of millions of American lives, for this country? Now, let's remember, the United States did nothing over Hungary in 1956. It was decided that this was not worth sacrificing millions of lives over Hungary in 1956. That was Eisenhower's decision. Lyndon Johnson made exactly the same decision over Czechoslovakia in 1968. It wasn't worth, it's not a vital interest of the United States. They took a different attitude towards Cuba in 1962. They said, that they were ready to escalate towards war with the Soviet Union over Cuba. So because that was the decision. That was clear. There's a consistency here, which is one president after another decides that what happens in the southern hemisphere of the United States is of vital national interest, and therefore it is imperative to prevail and even risk nuclear war. What it isn't the case in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. So if Hungary and Czechoslovakia were not worth these sacrifices, how did it come about that Ukraine is deemed worthy of sacrifice? And no one ever asks these questions. They say, well, either Putin is bluffing, or if he's not bluffing, well, we've got a hell of a lot more nuclear weapons than he has. This is Ivo Dalda, president of the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations. I think that was it, Council on Foreign Affairs. I can't remember what it's called. It's very prestigious. That's where you go and deliver a major foreign policy address. And then so this is and he's bemoaning people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Well, she's a real primitive, because Marjorie Taylor Greene says, hey, this is not our fight. Ukraine is nothing to us. I don't give a rat's ass about Vladimir Zelensky. She kind of puts it exactly like that. Not one penny for Zelensky. I mean, of course, she's in a minority. But nonetheless, that's exactly the kind of prudential attitude that you would expect from an American legislator. He said, but it's just not a vital interest of ours. It's not worth sacrificing American lives for this. But this Ivo Dalda thinks it's worth sacrificing American lives for this. So remember the Daisy ad in 1964, the famous Daisy ad, which was so inflammatory. It was, Bill Moyers was the one who kind of created that Daisy ad with that little girl with the daisies, throwing these daisies, and then 10, 9, 8, 7 thing, and then boom, and then we see the mushroom cloud. But it was thought so incendiary because it was Lyndon Johnson was saying that Barry Goldwater is so insane that he's going to lead us into a nuclear war. These right-wing primitives in the South are going to lead us into a civil war. So now it's the right-wing primitives. They're so primitive. They're so antediluvian that they're not willing to go to nuclear war with Russia. That's how terrible they are. So then they were terrible because they were ready to blow up the world because of their hatred for communism. And now they're terrible because they're not willing to blow up the world. That's Ivor Dalder, Chicago. I don't know. I'm going to keep Council of International Affairs or Council on Foreign Relations or whatever this prestigious organization is. But he was the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Now, this updated nuclear doctrine is obviously doesn't really add anything one way or to the add anything, because we kind of knew already. Putin kind of announced this in September, and it doesn't really deal with Russia's basic problem, because using nuclear weapons at this stage doesn't resolve the problem of this war, and it would be disproportionate. I mean, why would you use nuclear weapons? I mean, it's a disproportionate response when you've got lots of non-nuclear steps that you can take. And again, attacking a NATO power would also be disproportionate because you haven't exhausted all of your options in attacking Ukraine. I mean, you haven't destroyed the bridges over the Dnieper. You haven't destroyed Ukraine's infrastructure. You haven't destroyed Ukraine's energy infrastructure. You haven't destroyed all the transport hubs. Wiped out all Ukraine's military facilities. I mean, you could have done all of these air bases, whatever. Just destroy all of that. If you haven't done any of that, then I don't quite see why you would need to resort to nuclear weapons. And the same applies to you haven't ordered a full mobilization. I mean, you had a partial mobilization in September 2022, but nothing more since then. So, talking about nuclear weapons seems just kind of pointless. Russia's problem is also that ultimately it's accepted from the start. It accepted the premise as outlined by NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. I mean, Stoltenberg says we are not a party to the conflict. NATO is not a party to the conflict. And Stoltenberg has said this over and over again. And he sent, when it comes to but what about these arms that you're sending? He said, oh, well, that's in accord with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Now, of course, Stoltenberg is wrong in how he interprets the Charter. But the Russians have never challenged Stoltenberg's account. I mean, basically, Stoltenberg is wrong in claiming that that everything NATO is doing is in accord with Article 51 of the UN Charter. That's not what that says, because NATO has no right to eschew any possible peace agreements. That's not that isn't says. Oh, we can just go on fighting in perpetuity, and keep the war going for I mean, for as long as we need, as long as it takes. And today, Keir Starmer, one of the really thickest UK prime minister in a long time, Keir Starmer, he was at Rio at the G20 summit. He said that we are going to keep supporting Ukraine until it wins its war. Well, that actually has gone actually beyond what Biden has ever said. Biden has never said that our goal is for Ukraine to win this war, because Biden has said, "Oh, well, we'll keep supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes." But he always left it vague as to what as long as it takes, and then he kind of changed it, for as long as we can. But Starmer now says, for you, as long the goal is we're going to keep supporting Ukraine until it wins. Well, that means winning. Ukraine's goals, at least its publicly stated goals, is driving all Russians out of Ukraine, all Russians out of the basically restoring the 1991 borders of Ukraine. So I don't know. Is that Starmer? Now saying that's British policy, that you're going to commit yourself to getting back to Ukraine's 1991 borders. And again, I mean, if you are going to say that is your objective, then you say, well, then don't just stand there and wait. Order a conscription. Let the British people volunteer to go fight on behalf of Ukraine to restore the 1991 borders. I don't think there's going to be any real takers, but that's the view of Keir Starmer. So anyway, but that just going back to the point that Stoltenberg says, well, this is a call for Article 51 of the UN Charter. If you read Article 51, it doesn't say you can just simply go on fighting a war. There's also the issue of the entrance of the UN Security Council. UN Security Council has not authorized any kind of arming of Ukraine. The UN Security Council has not issued any kind of a condemnation of the attack on Ukraine. So there's nothing really basic there. The Article 51, the self-defense clause, yeah, you can use self-defense until the UN Security Council gets involved. But again, where do you get off rejecting peace agreements such as the Istanbul Agreement? That's certainly not in accord with Article 51. But the strange thing is that the Russians have never really challenged Stoltenberg's claims. First of all, his claim that NATO is acting in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. That's not correct. But also the notion that you are not a party to the conflict, when the Ukraine would not be able to continue this fight without being underwritten by NATO, means that you are a party to the conflict. If Ukraine is a wholly owned dependency of NATO, or basically the United States, then essentially you are a party to the conflict. Ukraine would not be able to do anything without NATO. So you are a party to the conflict. But Russia's not really made that case. So that's why it's hard to see how at this stage Russia can justify attacking um, targets outside of Ukraine, inside of NATO, and I don't even understand in what way that would actually serve any particular Russian purpose. Because if you were to attack um, in one of the NATO countries, that would just simply escalate things, and that would mobilize NATO, and presumably that's exactly what the Americans want. The Americans would just organize everybody, hey, but now we got NATO's really together, now we've got we one for all and all for one. This is exactly what we had dreamed of. So it doesn't advance Russia's cause particularly. So and again, I mean, if Russia had done it at an earlier stage, it might have been different. But at this stage, having already accepted the sort of the NATO premise, which is, hey, we're just helping Ukraine, but we're not a party to the conflict, then it'd be hard to see, what any attack on a military base in Poland would do, or attack on a military base in Romania would do. So now, but what interesting, I mean, if this attack today on Bryansk, clearly it's not an attack on Kursk. So clearly the story that it's all about Kursk was fake, phony story. This was not Kursk. The target was not the North Koreans. Again, they're supposed to, they're going to attack the North Koreans to send a message to Pyongyang. But the attack was on Bryansk. And we have to say that the selection of targets is being made by the Americans, because the Americans are the ones who have the satellite technology. They're the ones who can locate the targets, and then they provide this information to Ukrainians. So it was the decision to attack Bryansk was made by the Americans. Now, the question then is, are the Americans willing to escalate? So again, today's target, relatively modest. Okay, they hit an arms depot. Okay, that's not a huge deal. But would they then hit something else that is more serious, in the hope of, and this is really what the goal is. I mean, if we we have to think that what the Biden administration is doing at this stage is escalating with a view to provoking a Russian response. That's kind of what they're trying to do. Because then, if Russia responds in a fierce manner, then that essentially blocks any possibility of Trump putting forward a peace plan. I mean, if basically, let's say Russia does indeed attack a target outside of Ukraine in NATO land, it's going to be hard for Trump to come up with a peace plan. So I think that must be that's the goal here, which is to sabotage any possible peace proposal on the part of Trump. And that has to be, because this whole Ukrainian caper is from start to finish a Democrat's caper. It was done there. It started under Obama, Victoria Nuland, Biden himself. Biden was involved very early stage. Hunter was involved Hunter Biden involved at a very early stage. This whole project is a Democrat's project. And that's why, as soon as Biden was inaugurated as president, they kind of launched their escalation in Ukraine. There was when Lloyd Austin went to Ukraine and declared that the door to NATO membership for Ukraine is open. The door is open. I said that was what he said. He said that in October 2021. The door is open. Now, if you're right, and that's what, of course, provoked the special military operation, and that is that's the long-term Democrat project, and the escalation, the refusal on the part of the Biden administration at any time to de-escalate, to work out some reasonable accommodation, and instead to continue to provoke Russia, to continue to pour arms into the Ukraine. All of that is a Biden plan. So that's why the last thing these people want is for Trump to come along and to put a dampener on this process. Now, as I've said before, I mean, I am skeptical as to whether Trump would even in the absence of this this current escalation, even in the absence of that, whether Trump would be able to secure any kind of an agreement. Given the team that he has put together, given the pressure that he would come under, and all the claims that would come, this would be an American defeat. This is a defeat for NATO. Don't you realize what would happen? If we let Ukraine go, if we let Russia win, this will be the worst humiliation in NATO's history. He's going to be hear all of these talk. That somehow we cannot allow this. Because ultimately, the voices that say, "The hell with NATO," who the hell needs it? This is a terrible, awful alliance. It doesn't serve any American interest. That's still a minority view. I mean, it's the view here of the Gaggle. It's the view of Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you can name a dozen or so people like that. But it's not the view of all the people who would be have Trump's ear and would tell him, "Don't you realize how disastrously this would be for the United States if we allowed Putin to win? It would be the end for NATO. Do you want to be the president who presided over the dissolution of NATO?" So I think that would be an argument. Now, so I just think that it's it would be unlikely. I mean, as I say, I think the most likely, assuming that's a big assumption because there's 2 months to go before Trump takes over. But assuming that during these 2 months there isn't a dangerous escalation, and then essentially a kind of a shooting war, between Russia and the United States, or at least a Russian attack on a NATO country, something of that nature. Assuming that doesn't happen, Trump will put forward a peace plan involving freezing the conflict in place, and essentially just kicking the can down the road. In other words, they say no NATO membership for Ukraine. In the meantime, however, we will go on arming Ukraine, and but at least the fighting comes to an end. I don't think it's going to be. It's not a great deal for the Russians because I mean Russia has lost a lot of lives. I mean it's hard to know how many, but you have to assume that it's quite considerable. And now it's not going to be Minsk III in the sense that there isn't going to be any kind of a deal about integrating any territory within within Ukraine, which Minsk I and II envisaged the reintegration of Donetsk and Lugansk within Ukraine. Nothing like that would happen, but nonetheless, Ukraine would go on possessing a chunk of Donetsk. Not sure how much, but maybe about a third of it. A third to 40% of Donetsk would be in Ukraine's control. Maybe about I suppose what, I don't know, 50-60% of Kherson would be under Ukrainian control, and then I don't know, maybe 25% of Zaporozhye. So that would obviously be unsatisfactory for Russia, because Russia has said, this is this is an integral part of the Russian Federation. But then so this, it's not ideal. But the question then for the Russians would be, is it worth fighting? Go on fighting, and then provoking Trump. Trump is just a very mercurial, unpredictable figure. The other aspect of it is that, let's say Russia does accept, Ukraine doesn't accept, Trump may still take it out on Russia, and that kind of reminds me of the negotiations at Rambouillet in 1999, which were a fraudulent negotiation sponsored by the Americans between the Serbs and the Kosovo Albanians, the KLA. The goal there was to provoke the Serbs, to get them to reject the American plan, and then the Americans could go and bomb the Serbs. So they came up with a plan that was so humiliating for the Serbs, absolutely terrible plan for the Serbs, that they thought, well, the Serbs are bound to reject it, and then if the Serbs reject it, then we can start bombing. The problem was that the Kosovo Albanians wanted independence, or at least the KLA who was there at Rambouillet, they wanted independence, and said, well, hey, this plan you've put forward, that doesn't envisage independence. Now, the Americans were perfectly happy to give them independence. The problem was that the rest of NATO at that time, they said, well, we can't just sort of give them independence. I mean, we can't just have unilateral secession. I mean, Kosovo was still an integral part of Serbia. You can't just simply give them independence. So we can't agree to that. So the Americans were in a dilemma, because now the Serbs had accepted the plan, and the Kosovo Albanians had rejected it. That was the other way around. It was supposed to be that the Serbs would reject and the Kosovo Albanians would accept, and then they can start bombing the Serbs. So they had to do some fancy maneuvering, which was they had to say, look, you're going to get independence. We just can't say it publicly right now. They told them, they went through all this. They started persuading them and cajoling them. And, Wesley Clark flew to Pristina and told them, look, just say yes. Please say yes. Because if you say yes, we can start bombing the Serbs. We can't say in public that you're going to get independence. We just can't do it. But you will get it. And then they added in, in secret, which no one knew about, the famous Appendix B, which is that unrestricted NATO movement throughout Serbia. And NATO would be able to do whatever it wanted throughout Serbia, in Belgrade, wherever. And they said the Serbs are bound to reject this, and the Serbs actually. They didn't completely reject it, but they didn't accept it either. But they didn't sign the plan. But the Kosovo Albanians, okay, sure. Well, you give us our independence, and we won't say it in public, But that's it. That they got it, and the Americans got their bombing, so they could start. Oh, look, Rambouillet talks failed because of the awful, horrible, evil Serbs. I mean, eventually the truth came out, but by then it was too late. The Serbs had been bombed by NATO. So my point is simply that even if the Russians are reasonable and go out of their way to placate Trump and say, okay, well, we'll accept this. Yeah, okay, we'll accept a ceasefire along the line of contact. We accept that we're not going to go into full possession of Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Donetsk. We accept your commitment that Ukraine won't be in NATO for the foreseeable future. We accept that you're going to go on sending arms to Ukraine, but at least the fighting comes to an end. But then Ukraine says, no, we don't accept. Because then we essentially sign off a big chunk of our territory. And then, of course, Ukraine has this huge lobby within Washington who starts screaming, oh, Trump is selling out Ukraine. And then, of course, a number of members of the Trump team will say, my God, we can't do this. We can't sell out Ukraine. Don't you realize we're selling him out to Putin? Putin will have won against NATO. And so Trump, even though the Russians will have accepted and Zelensky would have rejected, Trump will then take out his anger and frustration at the Russians, much as they did with the Serbs. The Serbs accepted, they accepted every part of the plan, a horrible plan, Rambouillet, but they're the ones who got bombed. So that's kind of I think that's a way that that could develop. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments from the Gagglers. The good people, the people who pay buddies and apples wages. Not me. I mean, they don't give me anything, but at least they keep Buddy and Apple, in a not exactly in a positive frame of mind, but at least they limit their ferocity. Otherwise, if there wasn't anything coming in, they would just simply, they'd just go straight for my throat. So the Gagglers kind of keep them away from me. Anyway, Tanaki says, Kedves George, dear George, do you think it would be good were Lara Trump to be nominated for the vacant Florida Senate seat based on no other qualifications except her name? Has MAGA gone full Trump nepotism and personality cult? I come from a country that witnessed an extreme personality cult, and all I can see here is flashbacks from the 1980s. It ain't gonna end well. No, I guess so, but I have to say, Ceausescu, whatever else you can say about him, obviously, you're right about the personality cult, but he wasn't really that bad from Romania's perspective. I know you're going to disagree with me, and I'm sure you know much more about this than I do, but he maintained a certain independence in terms of foreign policy. Romania did keep out of the the Warsaw Pact orbit, and was allowed to pursue a kind of a foreign policy that was often quite critical of the Soviet Union, but he very cleverly got Romania off the loans dependency, because that's what happened to Poland. Poland, behaved, typically of them, absolutely reckless way, as could have been predicted, when they were borrowing like mad during the 1970s. And of course, at some point, the bill would come due. And so, they couldn't make their interest payments. And then, of course, the IMF basically took Poland over. So Ceausescu was kind of smart enough not to go down that path. It was obvious to Ceausescu what exactly the West was doing. The West was offering these loans in the expectation that Romania and Poland and Yugoslavia, that they wouldn't be able to repay them. That's what that's what rapacious creditors have always done. They lend you, they give you all this money, you take it, and of course, hey, there's a point at which you're going to have to start um, paying off the interest, and you can't do it. And of course, what was particularly nasty at that time was that the interest rates went through the roof under the policies of Paul Volcker in the United States, and nobody could pay off these loans, and so one after another, just country after another, including Argentina, Poland, everyone, Yugoslavia, they became complete dependencies of the IMF. They had to undertake drastic policies dictated by the IMF. But Romania, under Ceausescu, had actually paid off all of its loans. So it was basically he kind of avoided that trap. But of course, eventually it didn't work out so well for him. But so at least I have a certain soft spot for Ceausescu, and also he was treated rather badly in '89. I mean, that was not nice. Being essentially a show trial and execution. That was quite. Anyway, now going back to Lara Trump. Yeah, I mean, I think she has no qualifications at all. She had no qualifications, to hold these big positions that she had in the GOP. It was just simply her, her name. She's never impressed me. I mean, she when I used to watch Fox News, and she'd be a kind of a regular on Fox News, and I think she even became a contributor to Fox News. She never had anything of any interest to say about anything, just usual Republican boilerplate. Unfortunately, Trump is a rather, he practices nepotism. I mean, if you recall the first administration, first term, he gave these ridiculous jobs to Ivanka and Jared. Ivanka again was a completely ridiculous person, and then Jared. I mean, Jared obviously had he had his agenda, his extreme Zionist agenda, but they were entirely there because of their father. They had taken no part in the 2016 campaign, and they just simply took Trump's win as an opportunity for them to get these jobs in the administration, obviously very influential jobs. In the case of Jared, he seemed to have been involved in just about everything. Every aspect of Trump policymaking. Now, throughout this campaign, Trump has kept his distance from Ivanka and Jared. I mean, because I think there was so much bad feeling during his first term, particularly to Jared, and his stances on immigration. That basically, the MAGA crowd suspected, rightly, that Jared was sabotaging Trump's immigration policy. That all of the policies like building the wall and everything, that Jared was sabotaging. There was always a suspicion that Ivanka and Jared really wanted to keep in with their friends in the Hamptons. They wanted to keep in with their friends on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and but so Trump kept his distance from them up until now. But we'll see whether Ivanka and Jared worm their way back in. But it's very bad. I mean, I think that there's something really awful about this kind of nepotism. And now Biden did that with Dr. Jill, who's with her, her stethoscope hanging around her neck. Um, but Jill's emergence as a key player within the Biden administration was only because of Biden's infirmity. And evidently, Jill was looking forward very much to a second term by Biden when she effectively would be the president, because Biden clearly, was completely mentally and physically incompetent. So essentially, Jill would be running the country. And I thought she was very, very much looking forward to that. And so when she was elbowed out by by the Clintons and by Obama, she was very pissed, and she's been pissed for quite a long time. So now, I you know, I wouldn't. I think that Lara Trump would be a ridiculous choice, um, and but that doesn't mean that she won't be. I kind of liked it was Judy Hotchkiss's suggestion, I think last week, when she said that if Matt Gaetz doesn't make it through the confirmation process, then, then essentially Ron DeSantis can appoint Gates to complete Rubio's Senate term. I think that's a very good idea. There's no one can do anything about that, and so the senators who will have rejected Gates will now have Gates among them until 2022, till 2028. So for 4 years, they're going to have Gates among them. I rather like that plan, and that could happen. I mean, I think that there's a good chance that Gates will be undone in the Senate confirmation process. I mean, there's so many. I mean, the Republicans really have a very narrow margin. They got 53 seats. We already know that Murkowski will vote against. I think Susan Collins will almost certainly vote against. Then you got all those people like this guy, was it Kevin Kramer of North Dakota? And then you got Tom Tillis. You got all the people who really don't like Trump very much. The Senate is full of them. Not to mention Mitch McConnell, who's going to be around for a while. I mean, he's going to be there until 2026. So he's got 2 years in the Senate, and he really intends to get his own back at Trump. He's going to make life as difficult for Trump as possible, and there's nothing really much that Trump can do about them. I mean, he has the threat of, oh well, I'm going to primary the people who are going to vote against Gates. Well, he can't primary McConnell because McConnell is retiring, almost certainly retiring. He can't primary Murkowski. I mean, that's been done. I mean, it's been tried so many times before. I mean, Murkowski kind of, her family owns Alaska. The Democrats will always vote for her. It doesn't matter, and they've done that before. They beat her in the primary, and then she runs as an independent, and then she wins because the Democrats vote for her. So there's nothing you can do about Murkowski. I don't think there's anything much you can do about Susan Collins. I mean, she seems to have her base in Maine. So there's I think limited the things that Trump can do to get Gates through. I mean, there's a lot of big talk from Steve Bannon and everything. Oh yeah, we're going to go to war on behalf of Gates, but the margin is just too small. Ultimately, you lose 4 senators, which is very easy, and Trump doesn't really have the means to pressure them. So so if Gates doesn't make it, I think the best solution is Judy Hotchkiss's solution, which is we'll have Gates fill in for Rubio. Anyway, Danaki says, also, it's been 1,000 days of the special needs operation. How many more millennia will be needed to get to Odessa? I'm not even talking about Lvov. How many more North Korean soldiers and Iranian drones? Isn't Russia's performance extremely embarrassing, to say the least? I would hide away in shame for spreading the BS, all the BS hopium, but apparently Escobar, Martianov, Ritter have no such problems. I guess it pays nicely as well. Well, I have to say, that which always kind of baffles me that that whenever, I mean, these people, I mean, Escobar, Rita, Mariano, but even others, like Alistair Crook and the others, they always say, oh, well, Russia has won this war. Russia's winning this war. But they never really spell out what is it. I mean, how do you measure that? What's the 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 matrix or that you're using in order to make this declaration? Russia has won this war. As I say, it hasn't liberated anywhere closely liberated Donetsk. It's even a part of Lugansk is still under Ukrainian occupation, and then Kherson and Zaporozhye again are not fully under Russian occupation. Now that may happen again, but we don't know when. And this rate of progress is extremely slow. So when they say Russia's winning or Russia has won, it's always like, won what? If we go back to Putin's speech on February the 24th, 2022, when he announced the start of the so-called SMO, he set out, a set of war objectives. But it's hard to see how, Russia has achieved those war objectives. And that's why, whenever the ones who are saying they have won, Russia has won, they never explain in what way. I mean, let's leave aside the scale of the casualties. I mean, this just staggering numbers on both Russian and Ukrainian side. Who, according to the what Russia has said, according to what Putin has said, they are brother peoples. I mean, they are they're fellow Slavs. They one history, one civilization, one language. So anyone who kind of says, "Oh, this is great. Look at the Ukrainians. Look at they're making mincemeat of the Ukrainians. They're wiping the floor with the Ukrainians." But I mean, leaving aside that this isn't actually happening, but even if it were happening, that's a very strange achievement, given that this is, they're fellow Slavs. I mean, it's not just fellow Slavs. It's you share this common history. I mean, like Poles are fellow Slavs, but Russia doesn't share a common history with the Poles. But with Ukrainians, it's different. So leaving that aside, saying, well, at some point Ukraine will collapse, and that may well be true. I mean, there may well be a point at which Ukraine will collapse. I mean, you can't go on taking casualties on this scale. But that still doesn't really mean Russia has won, because of the whatever is outside of these four oblasts will simply be integrated within the West. One way or another, whether it's immediate NATO membership or NATO membership down the road, or all kinds of security guarantees, they're going to be integrated within the West. That's gone. That part of so that whatever that'll be, 70-80% of Ukraine, maybe two-thirds of Ukraine will be gone. So I it's just finding it difficult to see how these the people you refer to when they talk about this victory. NATO itself has not suffered any casualties. So, if the goal is to inflict a humiliation on NATO, that hasn't happened. If the goal is to hit, the NATO gang, that hasn't happened. NATO has been able to go on fighting a proxy war. That's exactly what NATO wanted. To fight a proxy war, other people are getting killed, not NATO. Other people are suffering, not NATO. So that's why I'm just always baffled, and that's why these people never really explain what is this win? How do you measure it? Anyway, Judy Hotchkiss, always good to see you. Thank you very much for your generosity, Judy. So Judy says, from TASS today, U.S. Congressman urges to impeach Biden for allowing strikes deep in Russia. Massey needs to introduce new bill of needs to introduce new bill of impeachment now. Yes, Dems control the House, and Republican support is a question mark, but needs to be done. I like the idea. Impeach Biden for allowing strikes deep into Russia. No, I mean, I think that's a very good idea. Again, essentially, is getting America involved possibly involved again. There's a real risk of the United States getting involved in a shooting war with Russia. Congress has had no say in the matter. Now, yeah, all right, we're going to make the argument, Congress has the right to declare war and so on, but Congress never does that. So we don't need to, labor over that point about Congress and the fact that it hasn't declared war. However, what hasn't happened, which is, that the Biden administration has not come before Congress and explained what it's hoping to achieve by escalating in this reckless fashion. Because basically, Americans are using American weapons on Russian soil against Russians, killing Russians on Russian soil. This is Americans are killing Russians on Russian soil. This is a very dangerous development. And basically, administration officials need to come before Congress to explain. And if they don't, then there should be an impeachment initiated. And besides, as we found out in the case of Trump, you can impeach somebody even when he's not in office. So even if Biden will be gone on January the 20th, they can still impeach him after January the 20th. So that's absolutely at the time when the Republicans will have the majority. So absolutely, they can go on, they can impeach, and make sure that that all Republicans are whipped in the House so that they get that that impeachment vote. Of course, the Senate won't convict him, but yeah, absolutely, you can't do that. Essentially, put America into this dangerous position without even at a minimum coming before Congress and explain what it is that you're doing, why you're doing it, and how are you going to avoid a possible dangerous shooting war, and what are you going to do to avoid a dangerous shooting war? So they have not done that. So yeah, I like Thomas Massey. I mean, I've heard that he's being considered for the position of Secretary of Agriculture. I hope he gets some job in the administration. But there's not very good. There's a little bit of bad blood, I think, between him and Trump. But I don't know whether that's been made up. But not made up. I mean, the two of them have made it up. But I remember during the first Trump term, they had a very uneasy relationship. And when Judy goes on, U.S. senators over the last 2 days. Joe Biden has set the stage for World War III. That's Mike Lee. Let's all pray it doesn't come to that. Yeah, Mike Lee. Yeah, he's a good guy. He's a libertarian. Rand Paul. Biden's grand finale, pushing us towards World War III before his exit. This is an unconstitutional decision to support a seemingly random plan. Josh Hawley, January the 20th can't come soon enough. Yeah, we need Trump back in office before Biden leads us into World War. Yeah, yeah. Impeaching Biden must start at the House, but senators speaking out, yeah, no, is important. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely think, yeah, Biden should be impeached, and you know, this, I mean, it is so reckless and and dangerous, and clearly done with a malevolent political purpose. I mean, this is clearly done, you know, with a view to undermining Trump. Because if you really wanted to do this, you could have done this a long time ago. You could have done this months ago. This issue of removing the restrictions on the use of ATACMS, it's been something that's been discussed for months and months. And Biden apparently, you haven't never made it quite explicit, Biden apparently rejected all such suggestions. So now he suddenly agrees. Why? What's the urgency to agree? They couldn't really explain other than coming up with this cockamamie story about the North Koreans. Oh God, the North Koreans. I mean, it's obviously a fraud. They had to make the story up as to why have you decided to do it now when for months and months you refused to do it. Oh, the North Koreans. So it's obviously a lie. So that's why they have to hold them in and explain what the hell they're doing. And if they don't come, or if they don't come up with a satisfactory explanation, that absolutely they should be impeached. Dale Owens, well, good to see you, Dale. George, what do you make of Morning Joe meeting up with Trump at Mar-a-Lago? Well, and then Dale goes on. So now they're having lunch with the guy they called Hitler. Were they not worried about being put against the wall and shot? Well, it's a very good question, and of course, you have to keep in mind. I mean, that Joe Scarborough, you know, he's a very, very insincere person, a man lacking complete integrity. Remember, he was not so long ago during the 90s, he was part of the Gingrich crew, and he was a absolute fire-breathing Gingrichite. He was always denouncing Gingrich for selling out the Republican cause. And then he was, then he did that Scarborough Country on MSNBC. Again, he was a kind of a fairly right-wing kind of guy. And then when MSNBC kind of, became this staging ground for the liberals, he kind of adapted himself. But in the 2015, 2016, he really gave Trump a lot of oxygen. I mean, Trump was on Morning Joe pretty much every day. He would call in on Morning Joe. It was 6 in the morning. I mean, Trump really doesn't sleep very much. Every 6 in the morning, Trump would call in, and he would engage in these long conversations with Joe and Mika, and they did a great deal to to mainstream, if you can use that as a word, as a verb, to mainstream Trump. Because it's still, if you could just go back to 2015, 2016, Trump was still seen as a kind of a weird, clownish, fringe candidate. No, people just simply didn't take him seriously. They just thought he was an entertainer. But it was his appearances on Morning Joe. I mean, he was there every day, phoning in, and they were really extolling his virtues. I remember they would always say, that this is a man who's a successful real estate tycoon in New York. One of the toughest real estate markets in the world. He was successful in Atlantic City. With all these tough mob connected gamblers, casino owners in Atlantic City. He managed to make it there. He had a hit TV show. They were very much saying, hey, you have to take this man seriously. This is a person, you can't just dismiss him. So they made him into a respectable figure. And and then they turned against him. So at some point in the 2016, after he had got the nomination, they turned on him, but not wholly, because they still went to his New Year's Eve party on 2016. After he had won the election in 2016, they went to his New Year's Eve party at Mar-a-Lago. So again, there they were. He's wearing black tie, and she's wearing her nice evening dress attire, and so they went there. So they still maintained their kind of their close relationship with Trump. Even so, this was December the 31st, 2016. But then, of course, during the Trump years and everything, they did all the whole fascist, Hitler, and so on, and all this thing. Now, why are they doing this now? I'm assuming, and is they're looking at these audience numbers. I mean, they are quite shocking. The collapse in audience engagement with at MSNBC and CNN has really shocked these cable owners, because it's just they can't you just can't go on. I mean, they're paying these huge salaries to the talent, if you can call them talent, Maddow, Hayes, Joanne Reed. They're picking up huge salaries, and nobody's watching these shows. And again, Joe and Mika, nobody's watching their shows. And they don't have a second act. I mean, they can still talk about Hitler, but no one's buying it. And if they keep doing that, then the numbers are going to go on tanking, because, hey, you shot your bolt. You did all this Hitler stuff. You did Hitler, you did Stalin, you did Mussolini. You brought on all these guests, all these Anne Applebaums and others who are telling you that Trump and Hitler are indistinguishable. You lost, and now people are just turning off. They say, well, why do we want to listen to this rubbish? Your candidate was defeated, humiliated. So what I think is going on here is that they're thinking of a second act, which is having some kind of a entree in a Trump second term. So somehow they'll go back to in a way. I mean, they can't quite go back to the days of of 2015 and 2016 when they had Trump on all the time, but somehow they'll have an entree with Trump. He'll still call them. They'll still be able to engage in conversation. I think they're smart enough to realize that for the time being, they can't just keep doing the Hitler thing. I think that's basically suicide. It just seems like, Hitler's about to take power. So I think that they can build some bridges to Trump, then that will, add something to their luster. I think that's the only reason. Look, there are going to be layoffs. There are going to be some serious layoffs at all of these TV channels, because they just can't go on paying these salaries. I mean, if you look at these audience numbers, I mean, they're just shocking. I mean, it's just it's complete gone. Everyone's just gone. So I think that's they're thinking, hey, the alternative would be big cuts in their salaries. That's and there might be even another alternative. They could just be canned altogether. They're going to put in some kind of new format, new hosts, and the whole Morning Joe crowd will just be dispersed, and some new show. I mean, the news business is very radical. Shows come and go. Then they just may decide this whole the Morning Joe format with all these gas bags going on and on for hour after hour. It's not working. We're losing money. We've got to think of something fresh, some new people, and maybe tap into the sort of the Joe Rogan nexus. So I don't know. I think they're probably calculating that we need to avoid getting canned, because if Scarborough and Mika are canned, there's really nowhere they can go. I mean, they could try and go to CNN, but everyone's booked up in CNN, and CNN is going to do its own mass firings very shortly. There's just too many talking heads picking up ridiculously unjustified salaries. So I'm thinking that they're kind of think that Joe and Mika are trying to invent a second act for themselves before they get fired. Anyway, thank you, Dale. And DJ answered my question in a very different way. He says they are a bootlicker class. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, obviously they're bootlickers, but I think it's much more about they have to they have to survive. I mean, there's going to be mass culling at MSNBC, CNN. This was such a humiliation. I mean, all these years, 8 years, you've been bashing Trump, and with gloating about all these legal problems, and gloating about how he's going to go to prison, gloating about Jack Smith, gloating about how he's going to be kicked off the ballot, and everything. You lost every single one, and you've been absolutely humiliated. The people had rendered their verdict. You kind of look rather silly. So you have to think of a second act. You have to think of, well, how do I reinvent myself? How do I make myself relevant in a Trump term? But there's no question. There's going to be a lot of firings. A lot of salaries are going to be halved, if not more, quartered, maybe quartered. Steve Brown says, yes, yes. To his credit, Trump has denounced the Biden decision on ATACMS. Yeah, like I didn't see that his denunciation, so I'd like to see the link to that. And then DJ, thank you very much for your generosity. Thank you. The dogs, it's good that you're thinking of the dogs, because you don't have to think about me. I mean, I don't get a look in. If I tried to dip my hand in, my hand would just be bitten off. So thank you. Steve says Biden should be indicted, yes, tried, yes, convicted, and sentenced to prison for his heinous crimes against humanity. His very existence is a crime. Yeah, I agree. I think that's I think that's right. And then Summer Petro says the two main presenters of Duran, along with others, are visiting Budapest at the invitation of the Hungarian government. Yeah, that's right. And then Patrick Henningsen is also here. What do I know about this forum? I don't really know much about it. I think it's something that's organized by the Hungarian embassy in the UK. But I don't really know that much about this. I'm going to meet Patrick Henningsen, I think, sometime this week. But yeah. Anyway, and Marty says Tuesday. Good evening, George and Gagglers. Marty, thank you for your generosity. Really appreciate it. And and thank you also for putting so many interesting things about Stanley Kubrick and 2001, posting them all on the locals board. Thank you. And then Cynthia, thank you as always, Cynthia, for your generosity. Thank you for all the great, fascinating information that you posted yesterday about 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, we got a real education there. So many really interesting things that I know I, for one, was completely unaware of. So thank you really, Cynthia. Thank you. It's for enormous amount of hard work and really, really interesting stuff there. Anyway, Cynthia says, Last night you asked why Kubrick chose to use the Blue Danube in 2001. Yeah, I did. Perhaps he associated the spinning motion of the satellites with the dancers in the waltz. It also produces a floating effect, making it perfect for us to watch the floating objects in space as we listen to the music being played. And it perfectly matches the optimism of humanity at that moment in the film. It then contrasts quite nicely with the later scary discovery of the unknown. Well, that could well be. Um, it's Kubrick had an interesting uh, ideas about music, because you remember it, at the start of Doctor Strangelove, um, we have uh, the one of the bomber aircraft is being refueled, and so be basically there's kind of an insertion of a nozzle into the bomber aircraft, and as it does so, there's the song is playing, which is "Try a Little Tenderness." So try a little tenderness, and that whole, and that obviously has a kind of a sexual connotation, as the bomber aircraft, obviously carrying nuclear weapons, is being refueled. So you just see this nozzle inserted into the aircraft and is being refueled. And then they're playing, try a little tenderness. So he has these kind of, vaguely sort of romantic sexual illusions, and he plays these the music appropriate to that. So that may, you may well be right that it is that's how it is. The Blue Danube with the sort of there's a kind of waltz-like motion of the satellites. It's kind of effective. It's a very pleasant piece of music. And then I guess I think you Cynthia, you mentioned in yesterday that why he chose Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, in English known as Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche's famous work. And that's when Nietzsche really kind of introduced the concept of the Übermensch, which was badly translated into English as the Superman, which isn't quite what Nietzsche meant. He didn't quite mean a Superman, but he meant Übermensch as somebody who transcends man, somebody who goes beyond man. And that's like Übermensch in German, going over man. And some of the later translations of Also sprach Zarathustra uses overman rather than Superman. But anyway, and I think you alluded to this, Cynthia, that somehow that's part of 2001, which is that it sort of suggests extraterrestrial intelligence that is kind of beyond the intelligence of man. So it's not the limitations of our intelligence, but there's an intelligence that is far greater than our own. And I guess the what's the thing? Not the meteorite. What the monument? What? Oh God, I forgot the term. The one that they kind of created. The one that emits the radiation. That was created by this extraterrestrial intelligence, even though we don't quite know exactly what that thing does. But the idea is that against this super intelligence, beyond anything human intelligence kind of created. And I can't say that I can exactly explain what Kubrick was trying to do in 2001, but I think that that's probably why he went for Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, somehow that this, the overman, there's something that goes beyond human intelligence. Anyway, Cynthius then goes on and says that, but more importantly, why did he choose to use Johann Strauss's The Blue Danube over Felix Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream? Well, the latter piece is obviously too fast-paced for such a slow-moving film as 2001. It's also a bit too whimsical, light, fairy tale-like to complement any science fiction film, including 2001. Plus, the bumbling and comical nature of the music doesn't mesh well with the overall film. No, I think that's right. I have to say that I'm not a huge fan never been a huge fan of Felix Mendelssohn's music. Didn't particularly like A Midsummer Night's Dream's music. So I'm rather glad that he chose The Blue Danube. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that waltz-like motion kind of fits into the sort of the aesthetic of this space travel and the movement of satellites, movement of planets, and meteors, and everything else that's moving in space. So I think I think it works very well in the film. So I'm kind of glad that he didn't use Mendelssohn. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much again for all your hard work and generosity. Really appreciate that. Now, Steve Brown says, it's interesting that Hungary was the first state to challenge the Soviet system in 1955. Actually, it was 56. But, and then the first nation to challenge the EU and EU-US aggression versus Russia in the Donbass 2022. I think it's, I mean, it wasn't quite the first one to challenge the Soviet system. Remember the Berlin workers in June 1953 challenged the Soviet system, but that was put down by the Soviets. That was June the 17th, 1953. And then yeah, you're right. The Hungarians did that. Yeah, the Hungarians do have a very a strongly rebellious character, which often ends in disaster for the Hungarians, because of course they did that in 1848, and while they defeated the Austrians in 1848. The Austrians called in their good friends, the Russians. The Russians came in and put down the Hungarians. The Hungarians also were really the first to challenge the Soviet rule in 1989. Remember, the whole thing, the whole breakdown of communist rule in Eastern Europe was triggered by what the Hungarians did. You remember the Hungarians took down the wire fencing between Hungary and Austria. They took down the wire fencing. So in other words, Hungarians could simply cross into Austria, which clearly wasn't the case before. And what then happened was, of course, that the East Germans came to Hungary and wanted to go via Hungary into Austria, and then, of course, on into West Germany. This is what then provoked this crisis, because the East Germans were now, leaving en masse from East Germany, going to Hungary, and then, through Hungary into to West Germany. And so then, the question arose, well, if the East Germans can leave East Germany via Hungary, why can't they leave via the wall, the Berlin Wall? And then, that was famously asked at a news conference, hey, can the East Germans leave via the wall? And they said, yeah, sure, you can do that. They were given a sign from Moscow that Moscow would not resist the opening of the Berlin Wall. So it was Hungary that really triggered the collapse of Soviet power in Eastern Europe in 1989. They just went ahead and they cut the border. Now, it's a very interesting issue that today they're taking a and Orban has obviously been resisting the entreaties of the EU on other issues such as immigration. And so he said, you can't use Hungary as a transit route through immigrants, and he did that in 2015 when Merkel called in, migrants from the Middle East can come to, we welcome them here in Europe. I mean, completely insane thing to say, and of course, well, they all the migrants started pouring in through the Balkans and into Hungary, and then Hungary had to basically close the border. So that really started Orban's war with the EU on the immigration question. But on this, I think the Hungarians have said this policy on Ukraine makes absolutely no sense. It's going to lead to disaster. And as always happens when there is a war between the West and Russia, it's Hungary that gets clobbered. And I think that's the point that Orban has emphasized time and again, which is that there's always a war between the West and Russia. World War I, World War II is essentially West versus Russia. And in both cases, even though Hungary was not an important player either in World War I or in World War II, Hungary got absolutely hammered. World War I, as a result, Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory. A third of its population wound up living outside of Hungary. And then in World War II, it suffered huge casualties. Both in the Eastern Front and when the Red Army pushed into Hungary. And he said, this is again, each time it's the West taking on Russia, we Hungarians are going to get clobbered. And so he said, this is exactly what's happening in Ukraine. It's the West versus Russia, and we're going to get clobbered. And I think that was a very sensible position. In '56, I mean, the Hungarians acted bravely. No, there's no denying that they acted bravely. They also acted foolishly. And one has to say that. And I think some of the smarter Hungarians realize that, and have realized that they acted foolishly, because they already had the experience of what happened in Berlin in 1953, when again the German workers kind of rose up and the Red Army basically crushed the German workers. So you already had a lesson there. First of all, that the Soviets would use force if their rule was challenged. Second, that the West wasn't going to come in and fight on their behalf. The West didn't come in and do anything in East Berlin. And there, you had, there might have been more justification, because this was after all happening in Germany. Germany was still under Allied occupation, but the West didn't do anything in East Berlin. So that was the Hungarians didn't take that lesson, and it was it clearly ended badly in '56. But that they kind of learned their lesson from that, and didn't the Kadar, I think, was a very effective leader. János Kadar was a very effective leader. He took over in '56, and he ruled Hungary until '89, which is he managed to keep the Russians happy, and he managed to keep the population quite happy. That basically it was a kind of a hands-off policy, just so long as you don't make trouble for the regime. And there was a formula that worked. I mean, Hungary. Kadar was a very smart leader, and Viktor Orban is also a very smart leader. Which was that, hey, this is these kinds of wars do not end well, and it's, and Hungary wants no part of it. So I think, again, I think the smarter leaders kind of learned their lesson. Anyway, thank you, Steve, for that. And Cynthia says monolith is the word. Thank you. It's monolith. I thought monument, meteor. I knew that the monolith is the word. That monolith, that mysterious monolith that was created by these extraterrestrial intelligence. Anyway, Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much for your generosity, Anne Marie. And Anne Marie says, "Well, this is a good. I recommend candles against gloominess. At least they make the atmosphere a bit warm and comforting." Do you think so? I don't know. I was thinking candles actually, add to the gloominess. I have to think about that, but I've never found candles to be particularly helpful. I mean, I know about these particular sun lamps, but I've heard mixed things about whether they really are effective. But let me think about the candles. Maybe the candles will help. Something has to. Anyway, Cynthia is on. George, do you realize that 2001 is the Kubrick film? Is the third Kubrick film, which you have showcased here at the Gaggle? Really? Are you trying to get a fourth Kubrick? I've done have I done? Is it the third? I've done Dr. Strangelove. What's the other one? I can't remember what else have I done of Kubrick's. I'm sure you're right, but I can't think of what else. I mean, other than Dr. Strangelove. We haven't done Lolita. But anyway, it says Kubrick is the third. Are you trying to go for a fourth Kubrick film? If you are, how about A Clockwork Orange, 1971? Maybe you poll it against other art house films. Then again, there are very few really good art house films made in English. Most of the finest ones are made in French, Italian, or Spanish. Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I've held off on art house movies. Though I think that would be a very good idea. It's like I also had an idea about doing one of these a poll on films in which the star of the film is a city, and but I mean, there are obviously a number of films where the star is a city, but you really have to go for English language films. I mean, I think you could find the star, plenty of films where New York is really the star of the film. I think San Francisco is the star of the film. I think you could find London, but then you'd have to go through. I mean, there probably are Cold War movies in which Berlin might be the star of the movie, but there are a number of films of it where Paris is the star of the movie. But again, that's in French, and whenever I upload these films, I lose the subtitles. So, but A Clockwork Orange, I think that's a good suggestion. Again, a lot of classical music there. I mean, that's even. Yeah, I mean, he plays there's a lot of Beethoven, a lot of Rossini. However, it's also quite violent, and of course, at the time, he was much criticized. It was quite a controversial film at the time because he was much criticized for aestheticizing violence. He was making violence beautiful. I think it was an unfair criticism, but you could see why people thought that he was. He was doing a kind of there's some kind of beauty to violence, because whenever anyone is getting beaten up in The Clockwork Orange, he's playing Rossini, and I guess that was part of Burgess's vision, that somehow this thug who was beating people up, also had this passion for classical music. He loved Beethoven. I mean, he was, as he kept referring to Ludwig van, and so somehow his love for Beethoven was part of his personality, which also had this violent, sadistic streak. So he put all that in the film, but the film came under attack, and there was, I remember in Britain, there were moves to try to get it banned. I think there were attempts to get it banned. Of course, they failed. All these moves inevitably failed, um, yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. Fourth, Clockwork Orange. Then Cynthia says, so instead you could poll a Clockwork Orange. She's got good suggestion. Clockwork Orange against other films that were inspired by Freudian psychoanalysis. That's a really good idea. Freudian. I've got to write this down. Freudian psychoanalysis. Well, we can just simply say any kind of, psycho. Spellbound. Yeah, I remember Spellbound. Yep. Strange Illusion. I haven't seen that one. Shock, 1945. The Locket, 1946. Shadow on the Wall. Whirlpool. These are really great suggestions. I've got to write this down. Make sure I've got this. Yeah. Now Voyager. Now Voyager. Strange Illusion. Strange Illusion. Or a Shock. The Locket. This is a really great idea. Because funny, I was thinking today of maybe have the theme of the next one would be like political biographies. And then, and I was thinking, we could have a poll. We'd have Gandhi. Oh yeah, why is this? Gandhi would be like a political biography. Yeah, Gandhi. Then you'd have Oliver Stone's Nixon, and you could even do the film about the Queen, with Helen Mirren. There was Tony Blair, and so I mean, anyone else coming up with I mean, I think there aren't enough political bios, but you can make something involving maybe even an assassination attempts against political leaders. So, like the Day of the Jackal, which I reviewed some time ago, but and it's obviously not a biography of de Gaulle, but nonetheless, de Gaulle features throughout the film. He is this kind of an omnipresent figure that so I thought that might be an idea. But this idea about the psychoanalysis is quite interesting. And the one film that you didn't mention about the psychoanalysis, and because when America discovered Freud, it really embraced Freud. It's the one with Ronald Reagan, the famous Ronald Reagan one about Where's the Rest of Me? That had this, which had this also the Freudian psychoanalysis. I can't remember the name. Everyone will remember, which film I'm talking about. But that also had this the Freudian psychoanalysis. So that's a really good idea. Thank you, Cynthia. And then perhaps you might try going for a fifth Kubrick film to showcase here. So you could poll Barry Lyndon. I don't know. I think that is such a slow film. I don't know whether Gagglers would have the time to watch it. Also, it's very, very dimly lit. It's not that easy to watch. I mean, much of it is really quite dark. So I don't know whether how well it would work on if you're watching it on a computer screen. But yeah, I mean, could do Barry Lyndon. That's a thought. Um, Barry Lyndon against other historical costume dramas. Yeah, no, that's a thought. Historical costume dramas. Yeah, we could do that. Barry Lyndon and in other historical costume dramas I'm thinking of is The Leopard. That was um, uh, with Burt Lancaster and, and which was Visconti. We had Visconti last week on with Death in Venice, but of course Visconti is also famous for The Leopard. Very long film. It's about 4 hours, and I think well I don't know. I can't remember whether. I mean, the version I've seen a number of versions. I mean, I've seen a version that's dubbed, and a version with some subtitles because it's one of these international things. So some of the conversation, Lancaster obviously is speaking in English, but Alain Delon is there, and I you know I don't know, Delon didn't speak any English, so I think Delon was dubbed in the film, I think, or maybe later versions had him in using subtitles. But yeah, but yeah, the historical costume dramas. I think that's a good idea. that would be a good theme as well. So yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Robert, always good to see you. Thank you very much for your generosity. So Robert says Tom Luongo suggests that Biden signing off on Ukraine's use of long-range missiles to attack Russia is a ploy to get Trump to intervene, at which point the Logan Act would be brought to bear to block Trump's inauguration. Sounds a bit far-fetched, but you can never put anything past the neocon mob. Well, that's exactly how I would have described it as well. It sounds far-fetched, but you can't put it past them, and it's obviously of a piece with what they did in 2016. They kind of provoked that by Obama's really outrageous act, because and it's very similar to what happens here. You remember, Trump wins an election. Trump promises during the campaign to improve relations with Russia. Obama at that stage is essentially an outgoing president. And instead of respecting the mandate that Trump had won in the election, he went directly against that and acted in order to worsen relations with Russia. The exact opposite of what the election had, the people had decided upon in the election. So that's what Obama did, and then he kind of trapped Trump, because Trump really was in really in an impossible dilemma, because Obama, he accuses Russia of interfering in the 2016 election. He expels Russian diplomats. He closes Russian diplomatic compounds. He imposes sanctions on Russia with a view to triggering the mirror-like response from the Russians. That's what they always do. So you got this response from the Russians. You got Russians would expel American diplomats, and Trump's got a really bad situation with Russia at the start of his administration. When the Russians decided not to respond, then of course that was used by Obama to trigger the investigation or the continued investigation of Trump. And particularly, remember in that meeting on January the 6th, the famous meeting that when Susan Rice wrote the email to herself, with Obama saying, "Oh, everything must be done by the book. Everything must be done by the book." It was significant that the FBI, this is Strzok and and the rest of them who had been investigating Flynn for ridiculous for Russian his Russian connections, and they said, well, we got to kind of close this investigation because they haven't found anything linking Flynn to Russia. And then they said, hey, now we've got an opportunity to continue with this investigation with Flynn over the Logan Act, because Flynn had had this conversation with Kislyak. So that was again, Obama had engineered that. So hey, you can keep the investigation going. So that was an attempt of an outgoing administration to defy what the voters had decided upon. And what Biden did by announcing that change of policy was precisely to go against the decision of the voters. I mean, the voters said they wanted this. Trump repeated again and again and again, he would bring this war to an end. And here's Biden doing exact opposite, trying to undermine that. Now, it is unique in American history for an outgoing administration to sabotage the incoming administration in this way. Because remember, when George Herbert Walker Bush, who had lost the election in November 1992, then committed American forces into Somalia. But he did that actually in accord with the wishes of the voters, because Clinton, awful creature that he was, Clinton was attacking Bush for not doing enough to intervene, not doing enough intervening in the world. He was letting dictators and tyrants to have their will, and he wasn't really siding with the people. He was bringing up how Bush was toasting the butchers of Beijing, and Bush wasn't doing enough for the Bosnians, the little Bosnians, the glorious Bosnians. Bush has to do more for the Bosnians. And so Bush essentially said, oh, yeah, all right, well, I'm going to intervene to feed the hungry in Somalia. But he did that. So when Bush did that, that was in accord with what was perceived to be the Clinton's election victory. Oh, America really can't just sort of sit around and be so inhuman and be, just adopt this realpolitik approach. No, we've got to be on the side of the people. So he did that in accord with the apparent wishes of the voters, and he did it in consultation with Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton thoroughly approved of this American intervention in Somalia. So what Obama did and what Biden has done was exact opposite of that. They absolutely defying the mandate rendered by the recent election. So I don't know if that's the goal, which is to trigger the Logan Act, but I think that it certainly sounds very plausible. Absolutely, it's the kind of thing that they would do. I think we're in dangerous times. I mean, there's no question. I mean, if I had to take a guess, I'd say that the Russians would act cautiously, waiting for Trump. Much as they did in 2016. They're not going to do anything. They would just wait and see what Trump intends to do. But yeah, I mean, I can quite see that if somehow Trump decides to conduct some negotiations or whatever, they'll say, "Oh, Logan Act." All right. Anyway, Danaki says Larry Fink and another BlackRock executive scouted for Treasury Secretary. What about? I thought that I'm not exactly sure why Scott Bessent isn't a shoo-in. I thought it was a done deal that it would be Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary. But on the other hand, I read today that Robert Lighthizer might be considered as Treasury Secretary. So he's a pretty good geezer. He's very much uh, a a tariff guy, which is where tariff. A lot of these Treasury Secretaries, a lot of people who come from the financial world, Wall Street, and so on. Trump likes them, but they don't like tariffs. Whereas Lighthizer, he's definitely a tariff person. So I think he'd be an interesting choice as Treasury Secretary. And Kubrick's Napoleon. Marty says Kubrick's Napoleon. Yes. Another one of that political biography, like Abel Gance's film about Napoleon. But of course, that's a silent film. I don't know how tolerant Gagglers would be to watch a silent movie. But that's again, if we ever do films which are political biographies, Abel Gance's Napoleon would definitely be there. And then Robert says, Jacob Bronowski. Wow, I remember Jacob Bronowski of the 1970s BBC series The Ascent of Man. That was a big series. It was a big deal. Everybody was talking about that. I don't know whether everybody actually watched it, but it was much talked about. It's a little like Kenneth Clarke's Civilization. That was more in the 1960s. And that again, huge thing. Everyone, Kenneth Clarke, who's the former head of the National Gallery, did that. It was a very impressive show. I mean, it was if you wanted to know history of art, that was where you would go. But Bronowski's anyway, the Ascent of Man was kind of following in that Kenneth Clarke tradition. Asked exactly this question. This is about Mendelssohn, and the question being why Strauss as against Mendelssohn. He asked exactly this question. He said that Kubrick chose the Blue Danube because of its quotidian association, because its mundane familiarity served to dramatize the fact that space travel by 2001 had become entirely commonplace. Huh. Well, that's an interesting idea. Hadn't really thought of that. So that's an interesting notion. Is the Blue Danube quotidian? I guess so. I mean, it's like most people think of a waltz. They think if it's a waltz, they will think of the Blue Danube. I remember when anyone who's seen the famous Hitchcock film with Joseph Cotton, where he's the it escapes me where he kills these his widows, and then this one of the people at the dinner table says, why I've got this tune ringing in my head, and she starts humming the tune, which is the Merry Widow, the Merry Widow. And they said, what is the name of that tune? What is the name of that tune? And Joseph, Shadow of a Doubt, that's the name of the film, Shadow of a Doubt. And Joseph Cotton, because he basically, he murders widows for a living, and he didn't want anyone to guess the name of the tune. And then somebody says, oh yeah, it's the Blue Danube. That's what that tune is, the Blue Danube. Yeah, the Blue Danube. They all kind of agree on that. So that's why what I mean is that it's not that quotidian, because they all seem to agree that this waltz, which is the Merry Widow waltz, was the Blue Danube. But of course, this girl is kind of persistent, and she kind of gets it. No, it's not the Blue Danube. No, finally she gets it, the Merry Widow. Anyway, I'm just saying that I'm not sure it's that quotidian. But Steve Brown says China company JARA is taking a major stake in Iran's Mansouriya gas field, a major NG field, natural gas field in Iraq. Okay, yeah. Well, that's yeah, that's what Chinese are doing. The field is in the east of Balad, which has been subject to security concerns, but these concerns primarily for Western oil and gas companies. Apparently, the Chinese investors feel secure enough there. Once again, it's ironic how this has gone when Bush and the neocons thought they could dominate Iraq with respect to U.S. oil and gas interests, but have not. That might further reinforce the theory that the U.S. invasion occupation of Iraq was based on Israel's security concern and not simply for Iraq's oil. I agree. I never thought that the argument which the left makes, which is, oh, it's all about the oil, made any sense, because there's no shortage of oil in the world. I mean, you could try and deny oil to somebody. I mean, the United States could try to do that. But, even if you deny oil in Iraq to somebody, there's plenty of oil there. There's plenty of oil in Saudi Arabia. There's oil in Iran, oil in Azerbaijan. There's oil in Russia. I mean, you can pretty much drill, anywhere in the world and you get oil. Oil will come gushing out. So the oil argument never made any sense at all. You want to get your hands on the oil, you can do it. Or if you try to deny anyone oil, it's not going to make any difference. There's plenty of oil everywhere. So it was always, no question, it was always about Israel. And that's why the people who conceived the Iraq invasion, and this was a long-term project. Remember, it started in the 1990s under Bill Kristol and the Project for the New America, and these people were colluding with the Israelis, like all the people like Richard Pearl and the others, they were colluding with the worst factions in Israel. And that's why during the 90s, I never really took any of that seriously. They're continually writing these articles, particularly once the Weekly Standard started around 1995. There were all these articles that we're going to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. And I could never understand, why. I mean, Hussein is a kind of a spent force, whatever, influence he once had, that's long gone. What do you care about? But of course, that was always the project. There was the Israel project, but it couldn't get off the ground. You needed a justification for it. You couldn't just simply go in and say, well, we're going to take out Saddam Hussein because he's a threat to Israel. And they seized on it with 9/11. And again, you couldn't quite explain the way it was done, because you had this attack on 9/11. Clearly, the Americans said, oh, Osama bin Laden was behind it, so we have to take out Osama bin Laden. What's any of that got to do with Saddam Hussein? So it was a very masterful propaganda campaign that was waged by Israel and by Israel's agents in the U.S., the neocons, to turn American policy around and to go after Saddam Hussein. But the groundwork was laid in the 90s with the collaboration between the neocons and the Israelis. And Steve Brown, thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it. For the dogs, yeah, that's right. So the dogs will be grateful to you. They'll not be grateful to me. Me, they have little respect for. But thank you so much, Steve. Robert says, I've got a better idea. Replace Morning Joe with Morning Buddy, featuring Buddy and George. I think that's a terrific idea. The one drawback, well, it's not really a drawback. I mean, because I was thinking, yeah, it's a drawback because it's early in the morning. It's early in the morning on the East Coast. As long as I can stay here in Hungary, and then, because for me, it wouldn't be really that early. I mean, the show would start at 6 a.m. on the East Coast, which is about noon here, which is not a bad time. I mean, if they force me to live in New York, that would be a little difficult, because starting a show at 6 a.m. I'd have difficulties with that. Buddy, no, I mean he'd do it in a flash, but I would have some difficulties doing it at 6 a.m. But if I can stay here, be on Central European time, absolutely, I'd do it. It's a great suggestion. Thank you. And then and Steve Brown says, better yet, Jimmy Dore and his wife. Okay, well, all right, that's good. Um, Gold up on the attackums. Yeah, the attackums thing. The stock markets around the world have really taken a pounding. They're really getting worried about World War III. So yeah, when the stock market is down, well, people are investing in gold, which is makes sense, and bonds. That you want to be safe. And then Dan Rock says, do you think that Hawley has been overlooked for some government cabinet posts? I'd have been less surprised with him than Gates. It's a very good question. I mean, all of these people. I mean, they all have presidential ambitions. I mean, you'd have to think that Marco Rubio will have ambitions for 2028. J.D. Vance will obviously have ambitions for 2028. And Hawley would obviously be a candidate for 2028, as would Tom Cotton. If you take a job in the administration, you have to give up your Senate seat. That's okay. I mean, you can give up your Senate seat if all you really want to do is either make money or run for president. But on the face of it, 2028 is going to be kind of a crowded field. As I say, Rubio is going to run. I think J.D. Vance is going to run. I think Hawley is going to run. Tom Cotton is going to run. And Ron DeSantis, may well not have another shot at it. So, only one of them is going to get the nomination. So I don't know whether there's much of an incentive to give up your Senate seat. Once you've given it up, then you don't have it anymore. Obviously, I mean, so it's not that easy to get back into the Senate. I mean, you could try running for governor or something, but then you're a governor. You're not in Washington anymore. So I kind of think that Hawley and Cotton probably, and Ted Cruz have made clear that they want to be around and for 2028 run. And then they don't have to give up their Senate seat. They're here now. They're going to have to give it up without any guarantees that they're ever going to be able to get their Senate seats back. So I don't know, but I think Hawley, he'd be a good attorney general. Absolutely, he's a smart guy. I just think Hawley, Cotton, Cruz, they're all eyeing 2028, and I don't think they want to give up their Senate seats. Anyway, and Cynthia says, apropos of Jacob Branomsky, that answer sounds better than the one that I came up with. I don't know about that. I don't know. I mean, your answer, Cynthia, makes sense to me. Branomsky, I mean, as I say, okay, maybe quotidian, but but as I say, look, if you look at Shadow of a Doubt, they say, no, the Blue Danube. The Blue Danube. The Blue Danube. So I don't know how quotidian it really is. Anyway, Robert says, the explanation for the monolith, we're going back to 2001, I heard, was that this super intelligent beings, which first gave man his ability to think, reasoned that this gift would eventually allow man to synthesize technology capable of both getting him to the moon and weapons of mass destruction capable of ending man's tour on Earth. That's a gift. The moon monolith signal triggered a signal on Jupiter, leading to an exploratory mission whose crew would both survive nuclear Armageddon and serve as specimens for the next level of transcendent intelligence. Well, that's interesting. Um, yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I haven't read the book, 2001. The book was written in conjunction with the script. So the script was jointly written by Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, but the book, which came out after the film, so the film wasn't really based on the book. The book came after the film, was written entirely by Arthur C. Clarke, and from what I've heard, again, I haven't read the book. The book is much clearer, much more explicit than the film. I mean, the film is aesthetically obviously quite stunning, but I think its meaning is definitely obscure. To say it's obscure exactly what Kubrick is trying to say, but maybe the book is much more explicit, and so maybe that what the way you've explained it is what it's about. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, maybe that should be the homework assignment for everyone of the Gaggle, to read the book and then come and proffer explanations for what the film is saying. Yeah, the Paths of Glory. Danrock suggested Paths of Glory, and then Cynthia says correctly, because I was also thinking, didn't we already screen Paths of Glory? Yeah, we screened it. Yeah, Paths of Glory, we did screen it, exactly right. Danrock says they made a bio of Bush, didn't they? Yeah. The bio of Bush, I think, was also Oliver Stone. I think so. Oliver Stone did Nixon. He did the Kennedy assassination, JFK, and then but he also did Bush, W. So I don't know whether we necessarily want to have more than one selection from Nixon, from Oliver Stone. I'd go for one from Stone, which would be Nixon. No, I'm not sure W merits an entire biography, but we'll see. And let's go back. Yeah, and then Ryan O'Neal. By the way, Ryan O'Neal, The Driver, is the best car chase flick in my opinion. I haven't seen that, but I like the fact that you said it, because whenever people talk about car chases, they always bring up Bullet, which I always thought was a very overrated film. I know I'm in a minority, but I think it's overrated. And of course, there's the car chase in The French Connection. I mean, it's kind of car versus a subway, but it's very well done. Barry Lyndon loves candles. Yeah, candle scene. Yeah, Barry Lyndon. Yeah. Steve Brown says, has the Logan Act ever been successfully prosecuted? No, I think it's only been once prosecuted throughout its history, 200-year history. Once there's been a prosecution, and it wasn't successful. And it's obviously unsuccessful because it's a violation of the First Amendment. I mean, you basically, anyone, a private citizen, has the right to go and talk to whomever he wants, even if the country is at war with somebody. I mean, he has the right to go and talk to the leader of an adversary country. So it's a totally ridiculous act, and it was an absolute disgrace that the scumbags in the Obama administration, some of the leftovers who kind of stayed on under Trump, like Sally Yates, thought that this is somehow a serious piece of legislation that you can actually try and prosecute an incoming national security advisor for doing what a national security advisor is supposed to do, talking to the Russian ambassador. And the idea of bringing the Logan Act into this, when he was acting responsibly. But again, it just saying, reinforces what I was saying earlier, that it used to be the case that somehow where we had these establishment types, they were the ones who were, well, we need to negotiate. We don't want to escalate. We don't want to get into a dangerous confrontation with Soviet Union. And here they're trying to prosecute an incoming national security advisor for talking to a Russian ambassador and saying, what you're supposed to say, which is, don't overreact. It's a new team that's coming in, and we're going to re-examine relations with Russia. And they said, oh, we'll use the Logan Act. Anyway, Steve Brown says, the only U.S.-American art film director of standing I can think of might be David Lynch. America has a very long history of anti-intellectualism, which is transcendent today. Yeah, well, obviously, David Lynch... but that's interesting. I mean, if we're going to have one film from David Lynch, what film of David Lynch's would people want to see? Would it be Blue Velvet? I mean, it's usually regarded as his masterpiece. But I wonder if that people think that's his the best film by Lynch. Anyway, Dan Rock says some mind-blowing movies: Mulholland Drive. Okay, so you Mulholland Drive, The Lost Highway, Wild at Heart. Huh. Okay, so Mulholland Drive, the Lost Highway. Okay, it's not bad. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I still regard Blue Velvet as better than Mulholland Drive or The Lost Highway, but I that's I can see why. Wild at Heart, I'm not huge fan of, but different people have different tastes. Dan Rock says, George, you said Clinton, horrible creature that he was. Alas, the horrible creature is still alive. I think when I said horrible creature that he was, I was referring to, it just reminded me of the 92 campaign, when it was a completely bogus, fraudulent campaign that he waged. Was somehow Bush was toasting the butchers of Beijing. Clinton did exactly the same thing, and that he somehow he wasn't bombing the Serbs. All these awful people around Clinton telling, oh, we should bomb the Serbs. We go lift and strike. You remember that phrase, lift and strike, lift the arms embargo and strike the Serbs. And so and that kind of gave him a kind of a wedge issue against Bush. I mean, everyone talks about, it's the economy stupid, it's the economy stupid. Well, it's the economy in the sense that Bush was tanking in the polls by the economy, but obviously people just didn't like Bush very much. He was just too waspy and very unlikable person. But the wedge issue that Clinton came up was supposedly, our foreign policy isn't interventionist enough. It's too much realpolitik. And somehow Bush and Baker kind of gave that impression that they are, that they're just these, cold, hard, waspy types who don't care about suffering. So there's again, awful creature that he was and still is. Anyway, Steve Brown says, Walter Hill too, perhaps John Borman, who made Deliverance. We had Deliverance. We had a screening of that. So, but I think I don't know whether Borman made any other worthwhile films. I mean, again, because that's if you say Deliverance, I mean, if I think of Borman, I can only think of Deliverance as a first-rate film, but I can't think of anything else that Borman did. And then Denrock says, only last week I watched Deliverance and 2 Walter Hill movies, Southern Comfort and Long Riders. All right. Yeah, I don't know whether either of them are exactly the gaggle, suitable for the gaggle, but we'll think about that. Steve Brown says, how did America come up with such awful leaders? Couldn't Wall Street Zionist trillionaire masters do better? Apparently not. Well, it is an interesting issue about how American leaders have evolved. You know, there used to be leaders who had no hesitation defying Israel. Remember, you know, Eisenhower demanded, that Israel withdraw from Sinai. Nixon took a tough line on Israel. Even Reagan took a tough line. George H.W. Bush, again, we were talking about him, took a tough line. Somehow, the degeneration has come relatively recently. But as I say, there were Jimmy Carter again. You know, there were presidents who actually were willing to bite the bullet to a certain extent. I mean, not as much as they should have, but they at least they did something, and which we don't get any of it at all. Anyway, Cynthia says, "Would The Last Emperor be a suitable biographic film to screen?" That actually is. That's a very good idea. The Last Emperor would absolutely work very well in those kind of political biography. And it's all in English, so it's all those Bertolucci. So absolutely, that's a great suggestion. Steve Brown says, "Must admit, I'm a sucker for Isabella Gianni. Still looks good, but I think had much plastic surgery." I like her too. Yeah, but I haven't seen her in a while. I mean, she was kind of a star in the 1980s. So I imagine if she's still active, she's had plastic surgery. I mean, it's 40 years ago, so. I would imagine. And Robert says, "Arsenic and Old Lace is another very amusing film on the subject of dispatching widowers to the next world." That is actually a very amusing, because it's very macabre. I mean, the whole thing is really quite macabre, and you're still supposed to like these sweet old ladies. I mean, these are terrible, horrible people, but yet it's a comedy. And you're supposed to think, oh, they're so adorable, and that was it was with I think it was Cary Grant. I think was in Arsenic and Old Lace. So yeah, I think we should screen it. I'm not quite sure what would be the context, but that would be a good film to screen. And then Steve Brown says, "Tom Cotton is an Arkansas senator. By the way, Arkansas has the most vicious, violent police pursuits. These are the guys with Dodge Chargers, and challenges, frequently challenging the state police to pursuits. Some are quite good on YouTube." Yeah, he's. I'm no fan of Cotton. However, I do think he's very smart. I mean, you see whenever he's on television and he's being interviewed, he's very good. He's very effective as a debater. He's very effective in handling hostile interviews, as is J.D. Vance. I mean, but Vance is, I think, more likable than Cotton. I mean, Cotton is smart, but not at all the kind of doesn't have a winning personality. Seven Uppers. This is Danaki says, "Seven Uppers had a great car chase scene." Yeah, and then he says, "Also the chase on foot through Marseille in French Connection 2 is much more memorable to me than the first installment." That's possible. I'm not sure, but the problem with French Connection 2 is that really boring plotting sequence, halfway through the film, which seems to go on forever and ever, where he's trying to, Popeye Doyle is trying to get off drugs. He'd been drugged and he's trying to get off, and that just goes on and on when he does the whole trying to get off, kick his addiction habit. So that's why I've never been a huge fan of French Connection 2. I take your point though about the chase scene, which it's on foot, but it is done well. Marty says, "John Borman, Excalibur." Okay, all right. If you like that sort of thing, but okay. the music there is Carmina Burana, says Dan Rock. Okay. Um, David Lynch, The Atomic Bomb. All right, so I think that's we got some good suggestions here, and I think my time is up. So who was join me. Thank you very much for all the excellent suggestions for future film screenings. Thank you above all to thank you above all to those who have put something into the tip jar. The thinking about the dogs, which is very, very much appreciated, because the most important thing is to get these dogs, off me. I mean, to get me off my back and off my throat, because every Wednesday, they start checking the tip jar, and if there's no action, they just go absolutely haywire. And these Chihuahuas are particularly ferocious. So I really, really appreciate everything Steve Brown says, and Ed Wood. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the contributions. Please, any further film suggestions, screening suggestions, please do so on the locals page, and we will be back on Thursday, the same time, and we'll continue with our this conversation. So good night. See you Thursday. All the best. Bye bye.